Hello, this is Defacto Review for this week. We bring to your attention two topics. First, what shall we do after this severe flooding in Ulaanbaatar city? Second, why bank profits keep growing, but shares price keep going down. We'll try to explain what's going on behind. So these are the two topics I would like to share my thoughts. First, about this flood. So what the country can do it now. July 5th, we had second or another big flood in Ulaanbaatar city. This time very short period flood, couple 3 hours extended. It's in the Bainzurg district, 21st Horro, and nearby a place called Dar Ich. 4 people have lost their life, including 10-month-old baby, and many dozens people are taken to the hospitals. Total about 97 ger or houses, and total about 100 cars have been damaged. Ulaanbaatar city authorities is working on time. They tried their best, and they cleaned up later on, reconnected back to electricity lines, and have helped people who have lost their houses to be accommodated. And they have separately made some route in a sport hall in some schools. So what kind of learnings we should have after all this flood? 2 things. One is, of course, we should talk about the insurance industry of Mongolia. Secondly, about urban planning, with the sense of protecting long, resilient plan against flood and other disasters. So let's talk about the insurance industry of the country. There are 323 insurance company, broker, the actuar, make people who are making so there are 323 insurance companies, brokers, companies, actuarists, probably, etc., and some 2,376 representative insurance agent. That's the whole industry. And total asset of this companies altogether is 475 billion MNT, which is, if you compare it, it's at the end of 2022. If you compare it with 2018, it is almost almost 43% growth. And we see it is growing, the industry. But however, it is not enough growing. There are different all type of possible insurances, but the smallest one is a long-term or life insurance. It is only 4.3. No, it is only 12.7% of the industry's total asset. The reserve fund of this insurance industry is 217 billion MNT. Out of, remember, total 475 billion MNT asset, they have a 17 billion MNT total reserve fund. So more or less, it can be resilient to those who have insured. Mongolians keep confusing in terms of the car, because there's some 100 people who have lost their cars to this flooding they have complained to the insurance company to get paid, but there is a required road insurance in Mongolia. When you register your vehicle, you should buy required insurance from 500 from 50,000 to 500,000 MNT. And this is, of course, substantially very small amount compared to the possible damage of any car in the country. But however, they are confusing that required insurance on the road accidents, against the road accidents, with the volunteer insurance against natural disaster like a flood. So we need to increase the understanding of the insurance products in the country by the people. Mongolians slowly growing their insurance contracts. For example, in 2021, there were 126 people had accidents and medical insurance. In 1 year, 2022, it was 195,000 made this agreement. The same with the asset property insurance, the growth, and also the car accident insurance. It was 81,000. In 2022, it was on 96,000. So, of course, compared with 1,200,000 cars we have in the country, it's a very, very small part of it. So slowly, we need to understand the difference between required insurance for car drivers and also the volunteer insurance against this kind of disastrous things. Those who got volunteer insurance was 96,000 in 2022, as I said. It's just 8% of the total cars. And it's also because they have insured, because mostly all of them have borrowed money or rented or borrowed money from the bank, non-bank financial institutes, which require them to have such insurance. That's why only these 96 people have insurance against flood and fire. But that insurance is providing only 5 million MNT, which is around only $1,300. So relatively, this premium Mongolians pay is very little. In fact, it's called insurance penetration, insurance density, and per capita in this country, people have only $25 insurance compared with the other countries, developed countries, where minimum $1,000 per capita insured money. So this industry is still to grow a lot. It has a big space to grow, in particular, for example, life insurance, very less developed insurance in Mongolia, because still the senior people regard their children like a pension, their pension insurance or pensions, and the younger people consider their parents as an emergency cash fund. So we need to change this because many people leave after their debt to their children, for example. Not everybody have enough money to cover even the funeral costs and other death-related costs. So it's on the insurance side. On the urban planning side, it's really a high time to reconsider our mind. We rethink about the flood and fire disaster and their insurance. What we can do it, we should start by assessing our city's flood risk. For that, we need to map the locations of past floods in our city, and also in IMAC centers as well. And then mapping areas that are susceptible to flooding based on their geography. Then we must have comprehensive flood risk assessment. Then after that, the certain sophisticated flood modeling can be made. Then after that, design responses to address also all problems, including local injustices. In the US, for example, a long time ago, the area where the black people were living, that was really more risky to the flood, for example, compared with the wealthy. That's why it's also called injustice, and we need to address. In fact, in Ulaanbaatar city, this Dair area on July 5th were relatively low-income people area. And there were many households made on the basin of the river, for example. So what else we can do? Develop flood emergency protocols and early warning systems. To develop and implement the plan, this city can, for example, build cooperation mechanisms between city government, meteorological agencies, emergency departments, people, media. Then determine the flood response actions to be triggered by an alert. Determine how the alert will be communicated to the public. Then communicate with the public and businesses located in the high-risk areas. And based on that, there is a really, based on this mapping of risks, the zones are separated, and premium for insurers against flood will be different in these areas depending on the risk level, etc. So there are internationally very good experiences all around the world. And Denver is a good case, where I was living, for example. They have a Cherry Creek, which goes through the city, but from time to time it had been always flooded. So they made several reservoirs underground, nearby, so that this water is kept somehow not going to the populated areas. So Ulaanbaatar city, all citizens are now, we need to rethink about what have done so far and change it based on the best experiences of other cities in the world. So that's what I wanted to share with you on the first topic about the flood. Our second topic today is about profits of bank and devaluation or decreasing of share values of commercial banks in Mongolia. As of August 8th this year, 2023, we have compared the initial offering prices of the first large 5 banks of Mongolia and their price and today's price. The largest bank of Mongolia, Trade and Development Bank, IPO price was 33,000 MNT per share, and now it's 32, 1,000 tugru less. Bogda Bank, initial price was 2,540, now only 87. Olumta Bank, 1,285 initial price, now 900. Han Bank. Han Bank is the only bank where the value per share had increased from 959 from IPO price to 1,100 today. Has Bank, 677 and now 583, almost 100, 200, 100 less. Then Turin Bank, State Bank, 590, now 515. So except Han Bank, all commercial banks' shares, which was recently very high, went down. It caused several questions. Why is it happening? Of course, it depends on the macroeconomic situations. However, it's also raised the issue of how realistic was valuation of these shares. The whole thing has happened because there is a law about commercial banks. They try to deconcentrate the ownership of the banks because many banks are owned by one or two persons now. And by this law, at the end of this year, it should be not more than 20% per owner or related people. And up to by June 30 this year, 2 months ago, 5 commercial banks made initial public offerings from 5 to 20%. Only State Bank was 20%, the rest was 5 to 10%. For example, let's take a Trade and Development Bank. And this is a large bank, in particular in the total loan portfolio of the country. 43% of total loan belongs to this Trade and Development Bank. What they did was they initially had 48 million shares. Then they have issued additional 5% of shares and 2.5 million shares, and each with a price of 33,000. Okay, and out of this 5%, out of this 5% shares, 85% was given to or sold to the so-called strategic investors. It's mostly like the largest deposit holders in this bank, and 15% was given to public. And now that this 15% have lost, so for example, today, 100 MNT per each share. There is one issue because for the short period, the 5 largest banks became public, if we can call it. Only 5-10% make companies public. But at least they said the argument was, okay, at least we have opened the door. And now the door should be even more wider opened by the end of this year, which sounds quite unrealistic because it's required by the law. They have to go unless they change law. Mongolian commercial banks are strong in lobby and they may change it. However, this sales will require some 2 or so trillion MNT stock security sales, and in other words, investments, which may be not very realistic in these circumstances. So questions raised why, again, the share prices are dropping at the time when the bank profits keep increasing. It's also the individual investors are more looking for fast profit. As soon as they increase, they are ready to sell. That means we need more institutional investors, large funds, such as, for example, pension fund of the country or social insurance fund. Pension fund is almost bankrupt. Social insurance, they have been investing by head of that insurance company before to commercial banks, just making individual decisions. They were not professional investors. We need institutional investors from those funds, and also there is a natural resources fund or national wealth fund. So we need to develop this system substantially now. Why? Because institutional investors will demand more transparency, more ethics from the bank, and they will invest for a longer period. So that's why it is good for stability of the commercial banks, where those institutions have a large chunk of their shares. Unfortunately, for example, today this TDB bank, almost 80% of owner shares of this bank, Mr. Ürtenbilik, he had done it through Mongolian and foreign registered owned companies. And this man is now on the run, for example. He was being investigated for a buying with public money, public shares, Irdinet, the largest copper plant, which was owned before by Mongolian and Russian government, and he bought the Russian government part with Mongolian government money. He was about recognizing that, but before investigation is finished, he put 3 billion MNT collateral and he left the country for 2 weeks. But he's not coming back, at least for another 6 months. For 6 months already. And his case involving some 20 persons, criminal files, now not being considered by the court because the absence of the main leader of this group. So this kind of things, for example, happening. But in a normal public company, it should not be happening. That's why we need larger investors to grow that sector. The other bank, for example, Goldman Bank, where shares went down for 302 weeks. Its returned earnings for quarter 2 of this year is 333 billion MNT. Bogt Bank, which had substantially lost the values per share, its returned earnings is now 33 billion MNT. So that's why naturally people ask questions why banks owners are benefiting, large owners, majority owners, at the time when minority are losing their values. So I'm just bringing this issue to raise many issues, questions, to be discussed in the society. Because without that discussions and without a serious push by minority shareholders to increase transparency of commercial banks, the commercial banks of Mongolia will have more problems. We don't need that because commercial banks steal a substantial largest brokerage system in the capital market of the country. So, and plus 90% of the players on the Mongolian stock exchange are Mongolians, domestic companies. It says that the foreigners are very reluctant to come to this capital market in Mongolia, which is not a good sign for further development of this capital market, without which the country's economy cannot go forward substantially as we want. So that's why I raised the concern today, and I shared with you my thoughts on that regard. So on this program of Defacto review, I have been giving some lights on 2 issues. On flood, what shall we do after? Second, on the commercial banks, IPO cases, and situations afterwards. Thank you very much for watching our program. See you next week.